starting with the list, that's already impressive.
What have you got on the list? Is it printed today?
Yes,
Sometimes it changes. Yeah.
Yes,
Alright.
quite recent.
Yeah.
Considering you started relatively late compared to others.
I'm a slow burner. I started late. I am planning to carry on for a long time. Yes, I'm not a very precocious composer.
So, why did you get drawn into this strange world of composing for moving images?
Well, you said it right. I was drawn in. I didn't really plan it. It happened kind of by mistake. I was already living in London for a few years, and I was doing some music for theatre, for plays, often unpaid, often with only 2 or 3 people in the audience that would come to see it. But a lot of fun. I was playing the piano on stage, and sometimes write music for 2 or 3 players. And it just happened almost by total chance that an actor came to see a play, and he was about to act in a film, and he liked the music, so he gave my name to the director. This was Paddy Branagh, an Irish director. So Paddy got to hear my theatre music, and he really liked it, and he offered me to do a feature film. I had never done one before, but he hadn't done one either. And in fact, the writer and the editor and the camera, the DOP of the film, they were all the very first film for everybody. So we were all scared, but it went very well. And Paddy won the San Sebastian Film Festival with his first movie, and he got money to make his second movie, and he asked me again, and then little by little things progressed from there.
I'm a great believer in the beginner's mind, starting from scratch into something new.
Yeah,
that often produces beautiful.
Yes. Raised to the occasion.
Yes. So that was roughly 1994.
That's right. So the film, I started working in 1993, and then we ended up recording in 1994.
Since we are already way back in the past, how did you get involved in music in the first place? What raised your interest?
Well, that was for a long time it was a start-stop affair. I started when I was a kid playing piano. My parents are music lovers, and I took piano lessons. I was singing in a choir for many years as a boy, until my voice broke. And then I kind of fell out of it when I was about 15 or 16. I didn't want to know about it anymore, and I was very busy with other things. And then when I was 18 or 19, I met a composer, very interesting man, who was giving talks about music. And I remember one particular talk that he gave where he started talking about counterpoint, and I got absolutely mesmerized by this thing. So I went to him and I said, where do I go? I want to learn this. And
that was in Italy?
That was in Italy, yes.
Where?
In Pisa. And so I studied counterpoint with a very eccentric American living in Florence. And before I knew, 6 years had gone. And at the same time I had resumed my piano studies, and I got my master's in piano, and I got very much into playing the piano again. And then I left Italy, because Pisa is a very small town. I had made some friends in London. I didn't have a very clear idea what I wanted to do. I thought maybe I'll just keep studying music, but I need to earn a living. And I had a friend here who's a piano tuner, is a piano technician, and he offered me to become his apprentice. So I came to London thinking I'm going to become a piano tuner, and that way I'll earn a living and be able to carry on studying counterpoint. That's really what I wanted to do. And to pass the time, I was doing some theatre music, and then I fell into film.
How should I put this? Composing applied music, which I mean music to support drama or speech or whatever, that also requires a good understanding of dramatic situations and text and.
Yeah, I guess so. Yes, I mean it's interesting. These first two movies that I did, my English wasn't very good, and they were Irish movies with a very strong Irish accent. I could hardly understand what they were talking about, but the situations were clear enough. And sometimes it's almost, I'd say in many situations it's interesting not to be distracted by the words, the detail of the words, and try to connect the music to something that is a little bit deeper. There are deeper themes that the film is probably connecting to, and so instead of connecting to the surface of the music, you can connect to the deeper themes of the movie, and that can be a good thing for the music.
Can you give an example for deeper levels of?
Well, I think I could give many, but there are many examples in Anna Karenina, for example, where I very specifically, I did not want to write music for characters. I didn't want to have Anna's theme and Vronsky to have Vronsky's theme, and I always think a little bit of Peter and the Wolf when I think of that approach. Okay, well, if you only have music, that makes sense, but if you already have actors playing their characters, why do you also need the music to do the same thing again? So I always think of music as some kind of spirit or demon, or something closer to the Greek the chorus in a Greek tragedy. It's something that is there on the side to maybe commenting on what you see. Empathizing up to a point, but not being responsible or be directly involved with the action. They're almost like signposts, and these sometimes I call them demons. These demons resonate. They reflect on what's happening, but they're also independent. They're not attached to one character. And I think of them as possibly the sound that could be given to a more abstract idea. I mean, in the case of Anna Karenina, it's easy to explain. There is an ideal at the basis of Anna's character that is the desire to live life in a different way. But that's not just Anna's idea, it's also the idea of Levin, of some other character. There's more than one person in the story of Anna Karenina that aspire to live life in a different way. So that's what the music is trying to do. It's trying to connect to that idea that is abstract, but very moving. For me, it's very powerful. It's more interesting than writing a theme for Anna.
Coming back to the beginning, being motivated to compose. Some composers are inspired by abstract ideas like counterpoint or more highly abstract structural things. You seem to be inspired by more dramatic situations or
ethics, maybe.
Ethics. Okay.
Yes, I guess inspiration comes from many different places. I found that for myself, when I can find a way to connect music to ethics and to these maybe aspirations and things that are not directly visible in the frame, but they have an effect on the characters. So it could be an aspiration, destiny, a desire for something different, or the absence of something that everybody's talking about.
No, my question was more independently of now composing for film. Are you somehow compelled to compose anyway? And what motivates you to do that, if at all?
Not really, no. I seem to find myself composing a lot, almost every day, but I don't have a compulsion. If I don't have a destination, a deadline, sometimes I write concert music. I wrote a violin concerto last year, but it was written for a very particular violinist and for an orchestra, and there was a date for the and the whole thing was kind of practical. And I always think, not to invoke unholy comparisons, but I think of the people I respect, like Bach writing every Sunday, having to write a mass that has to be performed that Sunday, and then you put it away, and then you write the next one. Next Sunday there is another one. That's the way I understand my job. There's some need, there's a practical need for music out there, and so I go for it. If there wasn't, I wouldn't.
Yes, composing for the draw is very peculiar.
I've never been able to do that. I never felt the need to do that. If I don't have any work for a month or so, I'm very happy. I can read some books and do some thinking.
Before we go into some more musical technical and things, I would like to explore. You've worked with Joe Wright more than once. I observed that across the field, often there emerge sort of collaborative pairs of composers and directors. I think it's a question of trust, I suppose. Or can you maybe explore that and how you communicate with Joe Wright?
Yes, there are a few directors with whom I've worked several times, and I think in each case it's a matter of get to understand each other and feeling also there is a respect for each other ideas, so that when ideas come up, there isn't an immediate resistance. There's the opposite. There's the desire to embrace ideas and make something out of them. I think the directors with whom I found myself most comfortable are directors that have very clear this idea that music needs to connect at a deeper level of narrative with the film, and it doesn't necessarily need to illustrate what you're already seeing. It doesn't need to provide an atmosphere that is a bit generic, or it doesn't need to provide some kind of tension, intense scene, or romance in a romantic scene. It can introduce an extra layer of narrative within the narrative, and so it can be very powerful in that respect. And whenever I work with directors that have that quite clear, it's easy to work with, because we don't talk about the music. We talk about other things. We talk about what is pressing that character to do that thing. Why is Anna decided at that moment to act in that way? Well, then the music connects to that desire of living life in a different way. And that's important. That's an important thing that the music can do.
So the you wouldn't talk about, or a director would come to you and say, for this scene I can imagine a piece from Mozart, or this composer or that composer.
There are directors that talk in that way, and I find it very misleading and very difficult to deal with. And it's a long conversation, but it has to do with the idea of style, I think. And so sometimes I have a director that say, "Can you do something jazzy there?" This is very generic. It doesn't really mean much. It's talking about the music because maybe the director has some idea of what he wants to do with a jazzy feel, but it doesn't help me to understand what the jazzy thing should do. You can do lots of, and it's the same with classical or bluesy or contemporary. They're almost meaningless, generic, stylistic labels, and it's very difficult to talk with a director that wants to talk about the music in that way instead of talking about the story.
in films there are many different situations and requirements for music. Do you see a limit for yourself how far you can deviate in certain directions? For example, in one moment you have to compose something which sounds like Beethoven, which is on your piano here, or the next moment it has to be drum and bass or techno music, and the next moment is something jazzy. Do you have a sort of a musical identity where you can go so far and that's it?
But I think again, I see the problems in a slightly different way. I think again you're talking about styles, and you're talking about more the sound it makes rather than what really the music is doing and what it's connecting to. I mean, I'm sure that there are limits to what I can do, just because I can't write all the music of the world. I can write Dario Marianelli's music, and then that's all I can do. Within that, I feel there is enough width for me to sometimes, let's say I can wear a costume, and so in Pride and Prejudice I wore briefly the costume of a late 18th or early 19th century composer, but exactly like an actor wearing a costume, you're not going to believe the acting unless there is something that is a little bit deeper and it comes from experience and comes from memory and is personal. You can't do it by numbers. An actor can put the costume on but can't lift the corners of his mouth 3 millimeters more. It has to come from something that is a bit real. And I feel exactly the same for the music. Otherwise, it just would be pastiche, and I have not a lot of interest in writing pastiche.
Unfortunately, a lot of film music is pastiche, in my view. And I looked at a few of your films, and sometimes I would say your music is almost better than the film.
That's a nice compliment.
Well, I'm not saying to flatter you, but I see it more as a problem. How do you deal with sort of poor scripts or films which go in a direction where it's sort of constructed but it doesn't quite take off, and whereas in the music...
Yeah, well, I still have to do my best. I can't just do lower than my best because maybe I don't believe in the movie. But I think it's an interesting problem. Sometimes you see that the movie is problematic, and sometimes I have the perception that there will be some problems, and I try to do the best I can for what is there. But I think, in a sense, my position of not writing music for what I see, not writing directly for what might end up on the screen, but writing for something that is a little more on the invisible side saves me from that. I don't have to connect to the bad acting if I think the acting is bad. I can connect to something else that is there.
So there's then the next question. At what point do you start actually getting involved in the composition for them? Before it actually gets shot, or during it, or in the last moment?
Yes. So I mean, it varies. It depends very much from the type of film. I mean, there have been movies where I've been involved before the script is finished because there were a number of musical references that had to be built into the story. So in the case of The Soloist, for example, which was about a musician obsessed with Beethoven music, I was responsible for choosing all the pieces by Beethoven that would be played at some point, and in some occasion I had to rearrange the music by Beethoven. I couldn't sleep at night, but somebody had to do it, and I tried to do it with all the respect I have. On occasion, when the music is visible on the screen and you see the musicians on the screen, I have to get in very early. Most of the time I get on board after the film has been shot, and then I have to try to put the commentary already after the event, and it's equally enjoyable. And sometimes because there is less time, the pressure is higher, but also there are benefits from having that pressure.
Yeah, working fast has sometimes, if you have too much time and too many options,
Exactly.
that can be stifling too.
Yeah.
But do you sometimes say, this is not enough time, I need...
Never.
On that level, do you sometimes, you said you think about music every day, do you sometimes come up with sketches and they sit somewhere and then you, in these urgent situations, you remember and take from this pool?
Yes, and I guess on every movie, I end up with some ideas that came out by working on that movie but weren't used, and they usually, I don't have a drawer where I keep them, but they stay at the back of my mind, and they might resurface years later. I think, there was that thing that I did but wasn't used, and let's see if it works here. That can happen.
In film, a normal viewer will see the film only once, and everything he or she perceives has to be clear and understandable at that moment. So when you write music, is that a constraint to be clear at any moment?
I think it's a good constraint if it is. I am not completely obsessed with making sure that everybody would understand everything at the first time. I try to do something that I understand, and if it brings up things that are slightly convoluted, but they have some kind of meaning for me, I will still do them, and hope that some listeners or some viewers will get them. But I don't try to make it easy for the sake of being easy. It has to still be interesting enough for me to enjoy myself as a listener myself. So I guess it at the back of my mind I keep that question, and possibly if there are moments when there is very important dialogue and my music has to sit below the dialogue, it's not going to do too much to attract attention to itself. And then if there is a moment where I know the music can be in the foreground, then maybe it can be a little more complex or do more. So I try to think about that